This video is brought to you by Captivating History. The Anglophone world has often denoted Vikings as barbarians and savages. Such a claim seems ironic, since the culture of the Britons was not light years ahead of the savages. The idea of culture as a thread that passes through time and moves down generations is a wholesome one. However, culture develops over time and is the lifeblood of civilizations. A group of people whose identity does not define itself with time is not a civilization, but a band of wayfarers. As for the lands of the Germanic tribes, which occupied much of Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, culture had not developed far beyond that of the savages of Scandinavia. Had the shoe been on the other foot, the Britons would have been the savages instead of the Norsemen. History has a way of painting invaders with a broad stroke. What else can one paint them with? People in communes have a way of life. Their artists draw pictures. Their poets sing songs. Their women wear jewelry and their men work on the farms. Nothing is on display of the people in legions and bands except their physique. Nevertheless, there is much more to unearth to the reflective observer, and it takes a curious mind to scratch the surface to unveil the secrets below. Such is the case of Vikings, the Scandinavian tribes that are often painted with a lazy stroke. Hidden below the cliché is the story of ordinary men and women who carved out a living on the harsh and unforgiving shores of the icy North Sea. It is the story of brave men and women who were not afraid to sail across uncharted oceans and search for unclaimed territories. They were part of a structured and organized society that believed in the rule of law. They loved feasting, poetry, and board games, and they took part in competitions that tested their physical capabilities. The Scandinavians were farmers, traders, and craftsmen who looted and plundered when it suited their needs. They were brutal warriors and brilliant military strategists who contributed greatly to European culture and history. The Viking Age, an era that lasted from 790 to 1066, was a time of great conquest, expansion, and exploration for the Scandinavian countries. Unlike the Romans and the British, the Vikings were not empire builders. They were explorers who colonized and conquered vast swaths of land. It is important to note that the Vikings were not a distinct ethnic race or tribe. The term Viking applied to all the raiders who arrived in Western Europe from the northern territories. The Scandinavian foreigners may not have been a nation, but they shared a socio-cultural distinctiveness from the rest of Europe. The most important distinction was that they were pagans, not Christians. Since they did not belong to a single empire, their history is complex and fragmented. Most of what is known about the Vikings comes from the sagas and chronicles written in later centuries. Much like the mythologies of other cultures, these texts exaggerate events and serve to further a political or religious agenda. We know that the Norsemen were content in their part of the world for quite some time, but there came a time when they developed an itch for exploration. A single event cannot explain or justify this hunger for travel and adventure. Many different factors contribute to a people going against their traditional way of life. In the case of the Vikings, one of the major factors was the pursuit of wealth. Other factors like population pressure, primogeniture, the rise of Christianity and its effect on trade, power struggles and the consolidation of kingdoms, and an abundance of vulnerable targets are also all valid assumptions. The Scandinavians had traded throughout Europe for years. As Western Europe, and especially Rome, wrestled with its pagan influences, trade and therefore the accruement of wealth suffered. When the Vikings started invading European lands, they had no qualms about attacking religious structures. They not only attacked Christians, they also fought among themselves to consolidate power. The first Viking attack on the British Isles was on the coastal monastery of Lindisfarne in 793. Terror escalated as the unprotected communities along the coast of Europe and the British Isles started hoping that they would somehow be spared. These raids and skirmishes went on for a few centuries. After their initial taste of European wealth, they started terrorizing and looting settlements, realizing it was quite a lucrative bid. In 845, Ragnar Lothbrok sailed up the River Seine and launched a brutal attack against Paris. He sacked the city and showed mainland Europe that no one was safe from the wrath of the Norsemen. Upon his death, his sons formed the Great Heathen Army and attacked England to avenge their father's murder. The Vikings' propensity for violence is well documented. It can be argued that they lived in violent times. but even by the standards of the day, they were considered extreme. However, the Vikings were not just seduced by greed, they were drawn to adventure. Their settlement and colonization of the Hebrides, the British Isles, the Faroe Islands, and parts of Russia and Europe is well known. But what about their exploration and settlement of Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland? One of the finest aspects of the Viking culture was the people's adaptability. The strong, independent, vibrant, and rich culture could copy, modify, adapt, develop, and create alongside foreign ideas. Since they were traders and travelers, they were exposed to various cultures, nationalities, and environments. Their tolerance for other ways of life was astonishing. Their superior shipbuilding and navigational skills backed their thirst for discovering new worlds. The Scandinavians were the most technologically advanced shipbuilders in Europe, and probably the best navigators in the world at the time. The typical Norse vessel was wide and stable with a shallow draft, enabling it to travel upriver and land on beaches. Their longboats were clinker-built. Their overlapping planks allowed more strength and flexibility. They were just as good for traversing the seas as they were for traveling upriver towards inland settlements. The longboats were integral to the Viking lifestyle. The sight of an arriving Viking longboat from afar was enough to instill fear in the hearts of the onlookers. Their shipbuilding skills would have been for naught if they did not know how to navigate the waters. But they did. They could travel far from land, establishing trading posts in new territories, and create settlements in areas that had been inaccessible up to that point. We do not exactly understand how the navigational techniques of the Vikings worked, but it is clear that they were great at judging speed, currents, wind direction, and predicting the tides. Their maritime tradition was mostly oral and was probably passed down through the generations. The Norsemen would use their five senses, practical experience, and intuition to sail the seas. They would use navigational markers like specific rock formations to ascertain their position and direction. They would also observe marine life and keep tabs on the preferred areas of different species. In days of mist and fog, their ear would guide them. By listening to the waves breaking on the shore, they would guide their longboats through the toughest of situations. Traveling across oceans did not just require great ships and navigational knowledge, it required courage and tenacity. Traversing the deep waters is not for the faint-hearted, and the men and women who undertook that journey did so at the risk of their lives. Women and children traveled alongside their husbands and fathers to colonize new lands and endured great hardships, pain, and deprivation without complaint. One of these great explorers was Leif Erikson. A monumental figure in Viking history, Leif was the first European to set foot in North America. When Christopher Columbus arrived at the continent's shores, he was almost half a millennium too late. Leif had moved to Greenland with his family, and his father had taught him about the ocean crossings and navigation. He had a natural appetite for sailing and had developed quite a reputation for being a seafarer. We have talked at length about the Viking passion for thrill and adventure. Now, let us turn our attention towards the everyday life of the Vikings. The Norse society had three tiers. The top tier comprised the Jarls, wealthy men who owned property and ships. Early in the Viking Age, chieftains controlled smaller areas. As time passed, a few strong leaders emerged and started to consolidate power. As these leaders came into power and became the definite figures of authority, the Jarls became aristocrats who were subordinate to these kings and held land for them. The Norse kings were drawn from the nobility and the ruling class. Succession did not guarantee an heir to the throne. As kings were expected to be strong, brave, and ferocious in battle, a weak monarch was replaced by open rebellion. In this way, Jarls were in a prominent position and could rise to become monarchs. Quite similarly, Jarls could also lose their ranks and become Carls. The Norse middle class was known as Carls. This category included farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. On raiding expeditions, they would form the rank and file of the Viking army and crew the longboats, allowing Carls to gain wealth and increase their stature. They could buy land with the money they brought back and venture up the social ladder to become Jarls. Normally, the oldest son inherited most of his father's fortunes, so Viking raiding parties often consisted of younger, ambitious sons who had not inherited much and were looking to make their mark on the world. Jarls and Carls were free men, but the third strata of the Norse society, the thralls, were not. The thralls were convicted criminals. captives from raiding expeditions or prisoners of war. They would be sold throughout Europe and the Middle East as slaves. The Vikings were known for capturing young men and women during their raids and selling them in slave markets, and they made a fortune from selling people. Thralls were the lowest of the low. Killing a thrall was not considered murder, but instead it was thought to be the destruction of property. In Viking society, women had almost the same status as men, unlike their counterparts in Europe and the Middle East. They could own land and conduct business if they so wished. They could also sell their freedom as a way of paying off their debts. It was very rare for thralls to buy their freedom. The social standing of people in Norse society was not set in stone. That is not to say that the Viking society was not patriarchal. It was, but women were seen as valued members of the community. Women were often left in charge of farms when the men were away. Although that may not sound like much, compared to the women in other civilizations at the time, Norse women had way more freedom. Modern culture has reduced the Vikings to one-dimensional ruthless warriors. They grew long beards, they yielded their swords, and they wreaked havoc. Some of it has to do with the acceptance of English as an international language. As such, it is easy to sympathize with the English authors of yore about their interpretation of the marauding plunderers. But the reality is much different. Their complex mythology, expansive pantheon, love of adventure, and tenacity against harsh environments paint Vikings as a unique civilization that contributed significantly to world history. To learn more about what life was like for Vikings, check out our book, History of the Vikings, a captivating guide to the Viking Age and feared Norse seafarers such as Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Egil Skilligrimsson, and more. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while they're still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.